The sun over Abuja in May 2016 did not carry the warmth of a new season. It bore the oppressive, heavy stillness of a secret waiting to be unearthed. In the gated highbrow estate of Gwarimpa, life usually moved with a rhythmic, predictable prestige. You could hear the sound of sweeping brooms on interlocking tiles, the low hum of high-voltage electric fences, and the distant, throaty roar of luxury engines navigating the wide, paved boulevards. But for Charity Chidiebere Aiyedogbon, the rhythm had suddenly, violently stopped. Known to thousands on social media as Deep Deal Chacha De Hammer, she was a woman whose digital footprint was as large as her physical presence. She was vibrant, outspoken, a businesswoman who moved through the capital city with the confidence of someone who had built her own world, brick by brick, deal by deal. She was a mother, a socialite, and to many, she was seemingly untouchable. Yet, on May 9th, the woman who lived her life out loud vanished into a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the very soul of the Federal Capital Territory. The first crack in the facade of normalcy appeared within the walls of her own sanctuary. When investigators finally gained access to her apartment, they didn't find the chaotic aftermath of a struggle. They found a haunting, freeze frame of a life interrupted in mid-motion. 6:57 Stephen sat cold on the cooker. The surface had begun to congeal into a pale, waxy film, a meal prepared with care for a night she would never see. Her bedroom was a gallery of unfulfilled plans. A dress was laid out on the bed, smooth and expectant, with a precision that spoke of a woman preparing for a social engagement. Perhaps a celebratory dinner, perhaps a business meeting, but certainly not an execution. There was no sign of a break-in, no blood on the polished marble floors, no overturned furniture to suggest a fight for her life. It was as if she had simply evaporated. In the world of true crime, such clean disappearances are often the most terrifying. They suggest a chilling truth. The predator didn't have to break down the door. They were invited in. As the days turned into a week, the digital world she dominated began to turn against her. The Female in Nigeria Fin community, a massive network of women where Chacha was a folk hero, began to vibrate with a specific, sharp-edged anxiety. For a woman who posted multiple times a day, sharing everything from business tips to cryptic warnings about her personal life, 48 hours of radio silence was not just a lapse. It was a siren. Then, on May 11th, a bizarre update appeared on her profile. A photo was uploaded showing her in a car. The caption read, "Going on a road trip." To the casual observer, it was a mundane travel update. To those who knew the cadence of her voice, it was a death knell. The phrasing was hollow. It lacked the sharp, punctuated, hammer wit that characterized her brand. It was a digital smokescreen, a clumsy attempt by a killer to hijack her persona, to wear her skin online while they put miles between the crime scene and the evidence. While her family scrambled through the cold bureaucracy of missing persons reports, a parallel war broke out in the court of public opinion. The vacuum of information was quickly filled by a prominent lawyer who began a series of explosive, whistleblower posts. He claimed to possess overwhelming evidence that Charity was dead and that her estranged husband David was the architect of her demise. He shared a gruesome, grainy image of a dismembered, headless torso. He claimed it was Charity. The internet, ever hungry for a clear villain, turned its collective fury toward the husband. The hashtags, the vitriol, the digital protests. It became a fog of war, a distraction that nearly allowed the real killers to slip into the shadows of the southeast. While the world screamed at David Aiyedogbon, the actual monsters were cleaning blood out of the upholstery of a charcoal grey Acura. But beneath the noise of the social media trial, the FCT Police Command was quietly stitching together a map made of silicon and steel. They weren't looking at Facebook comments. They were looking at cellular towers. They discovered that on the night she vanished, her 2 high-end mobile devices had pinged off towers in a sequence, leading away from the luxury of Gwarimpa and toward the dusty outskirts of the city. More importantly, her distinctive Acura ZDX, a vehicle as rare and bold as Chacha herself, had been captured on a CCTV feed near a highway bypass. It wasn't being driven by a high-stakes assassin or a vengeful ex-husband. It was being driven by a 27-year-old web designer named Paul Ezeugo. Paul was the ultimate modern predator. He wasn't a stranger lurking in an alley. He was a friend, cultivated in the glowing blue light of a smartphone screen. He had spent over a year grooming Charity, playing the role of the attentive, younger lover. He was the honey in a trap designed for a woman who thought she was too smart, too experienced to be caught. Alongside him was his accomplice, Emmanuel Adoga, the raw physical muscle needed to execute Paul's cold-blooded calculations. Paul hadn't just chanced upon Charity. He had studied her. He knew her routines. He knew her financial capacity. He knew her vulnerabilities. In the weeks leading up to May 9th, their communications spiked. Paul was cementing his place in her schedule, ensuring that when he finally made his move, there would be no reason for her to tell anyone else where she was going. He was the shadow in her inbox, waiting for the light to go out. The breakthrough finally came hundreds of kilometers away in Ezeugo. When the police pounced on a hidden garage, they didn't just find a car. They found the remnants of a life stolen. The Acura ZDX was being prepped for sale. Its interior had been scrubbed with industrial-grade cleaners. But they were not enough to hide the truth from modern forensics. Under the seats, in the crevices of the leather where the vacuum couldn't reach, were the biological traces of a struggle. Minute droplets of blood that told the story the killers tried so hard to wash away. Under the harsh, unyielding lights of the interrogation room, Paul's mask of the charming boyfriend didn't just crack. It disintegrated. His confession was a masterclass in the banality of evil. He admitted that they had lured Charity to a meeting in Kagini, a suburb of Abuja, under the guise of a romantic evening. As she sat in the passenger seat, trusting the man who had sent her good morning texts for an entire year, the air in the car was suddenly replaced by the terror of a physical assault. The mechanics of the murder were as brutal as they were efficient. They strangled the life out of her in the very vehicle that symbolized her independence. But the murder was only the first act of their depravity. To ensure she could never be identified, they drove her body to a secluded riverbank in Ushafa, a town known for its peaceful pottery and rolling hills. There, in the dark, they performed a ritual of erasure. Using a butcher's blade, they removed her head and her hands. They believed that by taking away her face and her fingerprints, they were taking away the police's ability to tell her story. They thought that without a name, there could be no justice. They packaged her remains into 2 heavy bags, weighted them with the callous indifference of trash, and dumped them into the brush. Then, they retreated to Ezeugo, carrying her phones, her bank tokens, her car, a digital and physical harvest from a life they had just harvested. For weeks, Paul and Emmanuel lived with the ghost of their crime. They used her phones to log into her accounts. They attempted to transfer funds. They replied to messages from her friends. They navigated her life as if it were a game. But every login was a breadcrumb. Every ping of a cellular tower was a GPS coordinate that led the FCT's cybercrime unit closer and closer to their doorstep. They were being hunted by the very technology they thought they had mastered. The forensic recovery of the remains in Ushafa was a somber, grueling affair. The site near the riverbank was a place of extreme desolation, a sharp contrast to the luxury of the life Charity had lived in Gwarimpa. When the bags were opened, the reality of the digital honey trap became undeniable. This wasn't just a crime for money, it was a crime of absolute possession. The carriers had wanted to own her status, her wealth, and when that wasn't enough, they wanted to own the narrative of her death by posing as her online. The recovery process took days, with divers and forensic anthropologists combing the mud for any remains the scavengers might have scattered. The legal fallout that followed was a labyrinth of Nigerian jurisprudence. The defamation suit filed by David Aiyedogbon against the online activists became a national obsession. 10 billion naira was awarded to him, a stern warning from the court to the era of blogging as judge and jury. The gruesome photo that had fueled 1,000 angry comments, it was proven to be a fake. A prop used in a digital circus to distract the world while the real killers ran. As the case moved toward the final sentencing, the courtroom was a theater of the macabre. Paul Ezeugo, once the suave digital suitor, sat slumped in the dock. His eyes refused to meet the gaze of Charity's children. The forensic experts presented their findings with a cold, mechanical precision. They spoke of blunt force trauma and post-mortem decapitation as if they were reading a shopping list. The judge remained unmoved by pleas for leniency. The premeditation was too clear. The cruelty was too deliberate. Charity's death left a permanent scar on the social fabric of Abuja. She became the face of a new kind of vulnerability. Her case forced a nation to ask, how well do we really know the people in our DMs? The hills of Ushafa remain, but they are forever marked by the memory of the butcher of Chacha. Her children were forced to grow up in the shadow of a tragedy that was dissected by millions of strangers. A private grief turned into a public spectacle. They had to fight not only for justice against her killers, but for her reputation against an online mob that had been convinced of her husband's guilt. In the final analysis, The story of the hammer is a narrative of two worlds. The sun-drenched estates of Abuja, where business is done with a handshake, and the dark digital underbelly, where a like is a weapon and a follow is a hunt. It is a story of how a woman's power was used to find her and how her trust was used to kill her. As the final gavel fell in the trials of Paul and Emmanuel, the truth remained. Charity Chidiebere Aiyedogbon was a woman who lived for the future, but was murdered by a ghost from her digital past. The silence that now surrounds her Gwarimpa apartment is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of a warning. Every time a friend request is accepted without thought, or a road trip is announced to the world, the shadow of Chacha De Hammer looms. She was a woman of iron and fire, reduced to a digital cautionary tale by men who saw her life as nothing more than a series of assets to be liquidated. As the sun sets over Zuma Rock, the echoes of her story continue to ripple through the city. A haunting reminder that in the search for connection, we must never forget the cost of being found. We look at the empty passenger seat of a charcoal grey Acura, and we realize the modern world doesn't just give us tools to connect. It gives monsters the keys to our front doors. Join the investigation. If the chilling layers of this betrayal moved you, don't let the voices of the victims be silenced. Subscribe to Echoes of the Unsolved 001 for deep dive investigations into Africa's most complex cases. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter in our search for the truth. Comment below. In an age of digital connection, do you believe we are more vulnerable to predators than ever before? Next on Echoes of the Unsolved, the septic tank secrets of Takoradi, Ghana. We are moving from the high-stakes world of Abuja to the port city of Takoradi, Ghana. In 2018, 4 young girls, Ruth Abaka, Priscilla Blessing Bentham, Ruth Love Quason, and Priscilla Koranchi, vanished into thin air. The trail led to a notorious Nigerian kidnapper, Samuel Udoitok Wills, a dramatic prison break that embarrassed the police, and a discovery in a septic tank that broke the heart of a nation. This case is a masterclass in suspense, international crime rings, and the devastating cost of a police investigation gone wrong.